Meanwhile I, in equal ignorance of machinery and channel, had to give orders only justified by minute acquaintance with both. So I navigated on general principles until they grounded us on a mud bank, just below a wooded point, and some 2 miles from the bridge of our destination. It was with a pang that I waved to Major Strong, who was on the other side of the channel in a tug, not to risk approaching us, but to steam on and finish the work if he could. Short was his triumph. Gliding round the point, he found himself instantly engaged with a light battery of 4 or 6 guns, doubtless the same we had seen in the distance. The Milton was within 250 yards. The Connecticut men fought their guns well, aided by the blacks, and it was exasperating for us to hear the shots while we could see nothing and do nothing. The scanty ammunition on our bow gun was exhausted, and the gun in the stern was useless from that position in which we lay. In vain we moved the men from side to side, rocking the vessel to dislodge it. The heat was terrific that August afternoon. I remember I found myself constantly changing places on the scorched deck, to keep my feet from being blistered. At last the officer in charge of the gun, a hardy lumberman from Maine, got the stern of the vessel so far round that he obtained the range of the battery through the cabin windows. But it would be necessary, he coolly added, on reporting to me the fact, to shoot away the corner of the cabin. I knew that this apartment was newly painted and gilded, and the idol of the poor captain's heart, but it was plain that even the thought of his own upholstery could not make the poor soul more wretched than he was. So I bade Captain Dolly blaze away, and thus we took our hand in that little game, though at our sacrifice. It was of no use. Down drifted our little consort round the point, her engine disabled and her engineer killed, as we afterwards found, though then we could only look and wonder. Still pluckily firing, she floated by upon the tide, which had now turned, and when with a last desperate effort we got off, our engine had one of its impracticable fits, and we could only follow her. The day was waning, and all its range of possibility had lain within the limits of that one tide. Our previous expeditions had been so successful, it now seemed hard to turn back. The river banks and rice fields, so beautiful before, seemed only a vexation now. But the swift current bore us on, and after our Parthian shots had died away, a new discharge of artillery opened upon us from our first antagonist of the morning, which still kept the other side of the stream. It had taken up a strong position on another bluff, almost out of range of the John Adams, but within easy range of us. The sharpest contest of the day was before us. Happily the engine and the engineer were now behaving well, and we were steering in a channel already traversed, and of which the dangerous points were known. But we had a long straight reach of river before us, heading directly toward the battery, which, having once got our range, had only to keep it while we could do nothing in return. The rebels certainly served their guns well. For the first time I discovered that there were certain compensating advantages in a slightly built craft, as compared with one more substantial. The missiles never lodged in the vessel, but crashed through some thin partition as if it were paper, to explode beyond us, or fall harmlessly in the water. Splintering, the chief source of wounds and death in wooden ships, was thus entirely avoided. The danger was that our machinery might be disabled, or that shots might strike below the waterline and sink us. This, however, did not happen. 15 projectiles, as we afterwards computed, passed through the vessel or cut the rigging. Yet few casualties occurred, and those instantly fatal. As my orderly stood leaning on a comrade's shoulder, the head of the latter was shot off. At last I myself felt a sudden blow in the side, as if from some prize-fighter, doubling me up for a moment, while I sank upon a seat. It proved afterwards to have been produced by the grazing of a ball, which, without tearing a garment, had yet made a large part of my side black and blue, leaving a sensation of paralysis, which made it difficult to stand. Supporting myself on Captain Rogers, I tried to comprehend what had happened, and I can remember being impressed by an odd feeling that I had now got my share, and should henceforth be a great deal safer than any of the rest. I am told that this often follows one's first experience of a wound. But this immediate contest, sharp as it was, proved brief. A turn in the river enabled us to use our own stern gun, and we soon glided into the comparative shelter of Wiltown Bluff. There, however, we were to encounter the danger of shipwreck superadded to that of fight. When the passage through the piles was first cleared, it had been marked by stakes, lest the rising tide should cover the remaining piles and make it difficult to run the passage. But when we again reached it, the stakes had somehow been knocked away, the piles were just covered by the swift current, and the little tugboat was aground upon them. She came off easily, however, with our aid, and when we in turn essayed the passage, we grounded also, but more firmly. We getting off at last, and making the passage, the tug again became lodged, when nearly past danger, and all our efforts proved powerless to pull her through. I therefore dropped down below, and sent the John Adams to her aid, while I superintended the final recall of the pickets, and the embarkation of the remaining refugees. While thus engaged, I felt little solicitude about the boats above. It was certain that the John Adams could safely go close to the piles on the lower side, that she was very strong, and that the other was very light. Still, it was natural to cast some anxious glances up the river, and it was with surprise that I presently saw a canoe descending, which contained Major Strong. Coming on board, he told me with some excitement that the tug could not possibly be got off, and he wished for orders. It was no time to consider whether it was not his place to have given orders, instead of going half a mile to seek them. I was by this time so far exhausted that everything seemed to pass me by as one in a dream. But I got into a boat, pushed up-stream, met presently the John Adams returning, and was informed by the officer in charge of the Connecticut battery that he had abandoned the tug, and, worse news yet, that his guns had been thrown overboard. It seemed to me then, and has always seemed, that this sacrifice was utterly needless, because although the captain of the John Adams had refused to risk his vessel by going near enough to receive the guns, he should have been compelled to do so. Though the thing was done without my knowledge and beyond my reach, yet, as commander of the expedition, I was technically responsible. It was hard to blame a lieutenant when his senior had shrunk from a decision and left him alone, nor was it easy to blame Major Strong, whom I knew to be a man of personal courage, though without much decision of character. He was subsequently tried by court-martial and acquitted, after which he resigned, and was lost at sea on his way home. The tug, being thus abandoned, must of course be burned to prevent her falling into the enemy's hands. Major Strong went with prompt fearlessness to do this at my order, after which he remained on the Enoch Dean, and I went on board the John Adams, being compelled to succumb at last and transfer all remaining responsibility to Captain Trowbridge. Exhausted as I was, I could still observe in a vague way the scene around me. Every available corner of the boat seemed like some vast auction-room of second-hand goods. Great piles of bedding and bundles lay on every side, with black heads emerging and black forms reclining in every stage of squalidness. Some seemed ill or wounded, or asleep. Others were chattering eagerly among themselves, singing, praying, or soliloquizing on joys to come. "Bress de Lord," I heard one woman say, "I spec I got salt victual now, nothin' but fresh victual dese 6 months, but I's git salt victual now," thus reversing, under pressure of the salt embargo, the usual anticipation of voyagers. Trowbridge told me long after that, on seeking a fan for my benefit, he could find but one on board, that this was in the hands of a fat old auntie who had just embarked, and sat on an enormous bundle of her goods in everybody's way, fanning herself vehemently, and ejaculating, as her gasping breath would permit, "Oh, do Jesus, oh, do Jesus," when the captain abruptly disarmed her of her fan, and left her continuing her pious exercises. Thus we glided down the river, in the waning light. Once more we encountered a battery, making 5 in all. I could hear the guns of the assailants, and could not distinguish the explosion of their shells and the answering throb of our own guns. The kind quartermaster kept bringing me news of what occurred, like Rebecca in Front de Brébeuf's castle, but discreetly withholding any actual casualties. Then all faded into safety and sleep, and we reached the Beaufort in the morning, after 36 hours of absence. A kind friend, who acted in South Carolina a nobler part amid tragedies than in any other early stage of triumphs, met us with an ambulance at the wharf, and the prisoners, the wounded, and the dead were duly attended. The reader will not care for any personal record of convalescence, though among the general military laudations of whiskey It is worth while to say that one life was saved in the opinion of my surgeons,